So one of the reasons that I like that book is because it names multiple sources of grief and then ways that we know in our hearts, even though it may be hard to do, to help move grief and honor grief. Of course, the book leaves out grief that is magnified by the pandemic in the state of our democracy. It leaves out not being able to attend school because of the pandemic, not being able to be together and sing Spirit of Life in unison. It doesn't name the grief of places we love closing down or having to live much of our lives through a computer screen. An article from the American Psychological Association reminds us that the COVID-19 pandemic is a physical health crisis and also a psychological one. While the situation provokes anxiety, stress, sadness, it's also a time for collective sorrow, says Sherry Cormer, PhD, a psychologist who specializes in grief and grief mentoring. She says it's important that we start recognizing that we're in the middle of this collective grief. We're all losing something now. Normally, I wouldn't try to lean so heavily on an article during a service, but I have to say this one really resonated with me. Cormer says that even people who haven't lost anything so concrete as a job or a loved one are effective. There is a communal grief as we watch our work, healthcare, education, and economic systems, all of these systems we depend on, destabilize. Robert Niemeyer, PhD and director of the Portland Institute for Lost and Transition, writes, "The crisis isn't just shaking our faith in those systems, it's upending our understanding of the world around us. The losses include our sense of predictability, control, justice, and belief that we can protect our children or elderly loved ones." He continues to say, of course, we aren't only attached to other humans. We're capable of losing places and projects, professions, possessions, and protections, all of which we may be powerfully attached to. He says that the pandemic forces us to confront the frailty of such attachments, whether it's our own local bookstore or the routines that sustain us through our days. I remember in seminary hearing about the term ambiguous loss, and Niemeyer explains that many of the losses that we're experiencing now are called ambiguous losses. There's a lack of clarity and definition of a single point, like death, and that lack of clarity can make it hard to move forward. As the pandemic has evolved, people have had to confront a series of losses, a loss of safety, a loss of social connections and personal freedoms, a loss of jobs and financial security. And going forward, people will experience new losses that we can't yet predict. We're talking about grieving a loss, one that keeps going and going, he says. George Bonanno, a PhD and a psychologist who heads the Loss, Trauma, and Emotional Lab at Teachers College at Columbia University, says, we don't just grieve for what's missing, but also for all the ways in which those losses affect our senses of self. You can experience grief over anything that feels like a loss of identity. Research shows, for instance, that losing a job can trigger a sense of prolonged grief and distinct from anxiety or depression. And that prolonged grief seems to be related to the impacts of job loss on self-esteem and belief in a just world. The article suggests that we name our grief, just like that book did. Write about it, talk about it, give shape to it, wrap language around it. James Pennebaker, a PhD at the University of Texas, has shown that writing about emotional upheavals can improve both our physical and our mental health. Name what you're losing. Individually and collectively, write about your personal strengths and coping skills. He suggests that most of us have never been through anything like this, but we've been through other challenging transitions, and it can help to write about how you got through a divorce or losing your job or other challenging transitions, and to remind yourself about how did you heal and how did you recover. This collective and communal grief, it just creates this tenuous and tender background to our lives. In normal circumstances, some of us may be struggling while others remain strong, but I find these months of the pandemic continue to take all of our reserves. Everybody's running a little bit low. And even so, we can't escape the truth of the way that the grief impacts our being. Bonama says grief is really about turning inward and recalibrating and thinking. This is not the way the world is anymore, and I need to adapt, he says. It's okay to feel grief over what we're losing. And when we do that, it allows us to let grief do its job so we can move on. Some of you have heard me read the poet Jan Richardson, or maybe you read her yourself. I just love the simplicity of her words and the accessibility of her poetry and her ability to speak the truth about our human existence. She just always resonates with me. And here is her poem, which she graciously grants permission for anyone to use during worship. She says that grief is the least linear thing I've ever experienced. It's hardly a tidy progression of stages. For me, it's more like living in a house where from time to time I crash through the floor and I land in a room I didn't know where I was. This is a blessing for those times. The blessing is called a blessing for falling into a new layer of grief. You thought you had hit every layer possible, that you had found the far limit of your sorrow, of your grief. Now the world falls from beneath your feet all over again, as if the wound were opening for the first time. Only now, with an ache you recognize as ancient. Here's the time for kindness, for your own, to yourself, as you fall, and you land hard in this layer that lies deeper than you ever imagined you could go. Think of it as a secret room, this space that has opened before you, that has opened inside you, though it may look sharp in every corner and sinister no matter where you turn. Think of it as a hidden chamber in your heart where you can stay as long as you need, where you will find provision you never wanted, but on which your life will now depend. I want to tell you, there is a treasure even here, that the sharp lines that so match your scars will lead to solace, that this space that feels so foreign to you will become for you a shelter. So let yourself fall. It will not be the same as last time, but do not let this be a cause for fear. These are the rooms around which your new home will grow, the home of your heart, the home of your life, that welcomes you with such completeness, opening and opening and opening itself to you. No part of you turned away. May it be so.
Happy Halloween. Yes, today is Halloween. This is a holiday that many people just love and look forward to. I remember always being excited for it to be Halloween. Really think about it. As a kid, what other holiday are you able to dress in a costume, run around outside after dark, often on a school night, go knocking on all the doors you can in the neighborhood, and be answered by getting candy? There's also the spooky fun of Halloween. Ghosts and witches, among other cutely designed images, are everywhere, usually looking somewhat cartoonish. Some people love the magic and the darker side of this time of year, where the witches and ghosts are not cartoonish. But there is much more to this night of fun than we often realize. Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, or whatever you might call it, is filled with ancient traditions and rituals that honor our loved ones who have died and the grief we feel for them. Halloween traces itself back at least 2,000 years ago with the very early Celtic people who celebrated their new year at what became the end of October. The celebration of Samhain honors the time when the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead is at its thinnest, and the ghosts of ancestors walk among the living. Ancient Samhain was held at the end of the harvest, with ritual bonfires, sacrifices to the gods and goddesses, in order to protect the food for the upcoming dark winter. And to protect themselves, the ancient Celts would dress in costume to disguise their identities so the ghosts and ghouls would not mistakenly carry them away to the underworld. This was a joyful time and a reflective celebration, remembering those who had passed while making sure you were protected into the next year. Eventually, Christianity had co-opted Samhain and changed it to All Saints' Day, or All Hallows. The night before became All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween. All Saints' Day is a Catholic celebration that honors or venerates the saints. Saints and martyrs, it was believed, or is believed, are received into heaven more directly, and that their path should be followed. It was thought that by gently replacing the Celtic gods and goddesses with something seen as more positive, then the pagan conversion to Christianity would go smoother. What happened, though, was that the newer practices blended with many of the old ancient Samhain traditions that still survive and are continued up to this day. I could go on and on about the spiritual history of Halloween and why we celebrate it the way we do. I do want to stress, though, that today is more than just a fun holiday. In the United States, we don't exactly have a day or series of days in the year that are specifically designated as days to honor our ancestors. Yes, we have Memorial Day, which honors our ancestors who have served in the military, but Halloween is the closest we have to a Day of the Dead. At this time of year, most UU churches will hold and honor the ancestors type worship service. Prior to our churches being virtual, often there would be some kind of ritual to honor the people we have lost. At my home church one year, we each brought with us a brightly colored leaf, symbolizing someone we had loved that had passed away. The leaves were collected together on a table at the beginning of the service, and then at the end, we were invited to come and take a leaf with the idea that even though that leaf may not be the one we laid on the table, it represented an ancestor who was watching over us. I found this to be a deeply meaningful way to not only hold my grief over who I've lost, but to honor the grief of others as well. There are celebrations, rituals, holidays, and time set aside to grieve and remember in most countries, cultures, and religious traditions around the globe. In Judaism, ancestors and loved ones who have passed are honored on the anniversary of their death by saying the Kaddish, a prayer for that loved one, and lighting a yahrzeit candle. It is said in the Jewish tradition that the souls of loved ones that have passed are held in the flame of that yahrzeit candle. This is a candle that is lit each day during the week of mourning right after a death and each anniversary of that death thereafter. While Jewish law does not dictate that a candle be lit at all, it has become a very ingrained tradition and thus an important part of the ritual of death. It can be any candle that lasts at least 24 hours or the time between sunset on the eve of the anniversary of the death to the following sunset the next night. It is a time of introspection and reflection. Mahalia, which is a Hindu tradition, is a time when the dead are invoked with prayers spoken to put souls of deceased loved ones to rest until they meet us again. Families will pray to the god Durga to keep demons away from both the living and the dead. In the Orissa tradition of the Yoruba people of West Africa and in many other locations around the world, ancestors are the foundation of all things. They are the link between what is seen and not seen. Our ancestors know what our needs, desires, and wants are because they were once alive with similar needs, desires, and wants. You can talk to them and ask for their help and guidance when you need it. However, asking for help must be balanced with honoring their lives. A friend of mine is Yoruba, and each morning when she wakes up, she speaks directly to her ancestors, wishing each of them a good morning and honoring something from their lives. I find that a beautiful way to begin each day. So from Dia de los Muertos in Mexico and Central America, Odan in Japan, the Buddhist and Taoist Hungry Ghost Festival, modern pagan celebrations of Samhain, or any of the multitude of ritual traditions found around the world, how you honor those who have gone before you is a deeply personal and meaningful experience. One such experience was shared in a blog article called When Relatives Die, They Become Ancestors from onbeing.org, written by Keo Kalia Yang, who is a Hmong American teacher, public speaker, and a writer who lives here in the Twin Cities. Her aunt, who had led a very hard life, was then in the end stages of cancer and did not have much longer to live. She began her story as a phone call with her auntie that had just ended. She writes, "My little girl, 3 going on 4, was with me in the car, tucked in her car seat in the back of the minivan, feet dangling in her pink Crocs. She saw that I was weeping after the call. She said, 'Niam, why are you crying?' I said, 'My auntie is dying.' She said, 'Why?' I said, 'She's very sick.' She said, 'That's so sad, mother, but I'm right here.' I said, 'Yes, you are, and I'm very lucky to have you right here.' She said, 'Funerals are fun, aren't they?' I said, 'No, they are very sad.' She said, 'Aren't ancestors nice?' I said, 'Yes, they are.' She said, 'Don't worry, Mama. When your auntie dies, she will become an ancestor, right?' I said, 'Right.' My little girl was right. In the home that I come from, when relatives die, they become ancestors. At New Year, you cook them a meal. You place Chinese spoons around bowls of steaming chicken and broth and freshly steamed jasmine rice, and you call them to the table. You can't see them, but you give them a little time to eat first before the family that is alive gathers around and settles down to a meal. When you're afraid at any time of the year, you ask them to strengthen your heart, knowing that they are your past and you are their future, and they are on your side for all of eternity. I remember being a year or 2 older than my daughter and feeling afraid. I remembered how I used to roll up blankets and put them on all sides of the bed. I remembered how in my head the blankets represented the arms of my ancestors around me, holding me safe. I remembered that relief I felt, the lifting of the weight in my heart, and how beneath the light of the moon and the stars, I could fall into rest, knowing that I was not alone, had never been alone, and would never be alone. For I was the product of at least 1,000 people's work, their lives and their legacies. I was a vision child, born from their perspective, armed with their histories, out to create our shared future." End article. What a beautiful perspective. Today, as you go forward into the Samhain, Halloween, or whatever name you are giving today, however you choose to celebrate, remember your ancestors. Always remember that you are the result of the work of thousands. Remember that you are not alone. You have the arms of your ancestors wrapped around you, supporting you as you go through your life. On this Halloween night tonight, take a little bit of time to honor your loved ones who came and left before you. Feel your grief over the loss of them and celebrate how you know they would want you to. We all have stories about our ancestors and our connections to them. It is my personal belief that we are more deeply connected to one another than we often give ourselves credit for. I remember a time when the thought of a relative suddenly popped in my mind. I was out to dinner with a friend in the middle of a conversation, and suddenly I thought about my great uncle Maury, who lived in Florida. He'd always been very nice to me and we got along well. The memory I suddenly thought about was the last time I had seen him, which was at the airport while we each waited for our planes to board, his to Florida, mine to California. The memory made me feel good. Later, after getting home, I discovered a message from my mom saying that my Uncle Maury had passed away that afternoon. So whatever it was that happened there, it makes me certain that our connection to our loved ones runs deep and strong. So what are your connections to your ancestors? If you are grieving a loss and want to share a memory, or if you have a ritual or tradition in your family to honor your ancestors, we'll take some time now to share as you feel comfortable. Please either raise your hand, wave at the screen, or use the raise hand function on Zoom and we will call on you. You can also type something in the chat if you feel more comfortable doing that.
Richard?
Yes, the circumstances of how a person leaves makes it feel. My wife died after 8 years of suffering from frontal temporal lobe dementia. So I was grieving while she was suffering. So upon her death, I felt relief. And then I felt good, and then I felt guilty for feeling good upon her passing, which I don't know if that makes any sense to others.
Murray?
I'm gonna piggyback on that, Richard. My mother had Alzheimer's, and after her funeral and during her funeral, I was not crying. And I'm not crying. This is interesting. Everybody else, my siblings, are crying. But I grieved her while she was living with us for almost 2.5 years. So I went through, I saw the decline. So I didn't realize I was even doing it until the funeral, and my siblings were just sobbing and I was fine. And I touched her hand before the casket closed and I was at peace. So grief is definitely different for different people.
Polly?
Somebody told me once that cardinals, the bird cardinals, are representative of someone lost that's close to you. And I have a connection with a female cardinal. There's a bonded pair that lives in the bushes outside of my kitchen window. And I get to see that cardinal, the female cardinal, a lot. And I talk to her as if I was talking to Kathleen, and whether it means something or not, I don't know, but it feels like it means something to me.
Bruce, I saw your hand first and I unmuted you.
Okay.
I'm going to tie in a little bit on what Lisa had said. When my mom was dying, I was called down to the nursing home in my hometown. And my dad had died probably about 4 years previous, something like that. And my mom was still in the nursing home fighting. She's at the edge of staying alive and fighting to either stay alive or to die. So we were there. We were talking with her, and I finally told her, "Mom, you can let go now. Daddy's waiting for you." Or she called him Vanny for Van. Vanny is waiting for you. He's at peace. He wants you to join him. It's like she had to get permission. She was still breathing, kind of fighting. We get home, or maybe it's even on the way home, got a phone call. My mom had just died. It was like she needed to have permission to let go. And I was able to give her that. I was able to tell that that Vanny, the dad, is waiting for you. It's okay. So there's times we can even help them on their journey. Thank you.
Jesse? I unmuted you.
Okay. For me, ancestors and other lost loved ones are part of my spirituality. And so often when I'm struggling with a decision or something else, I will seek their advice through something similar to prayer. And usually I get an answer. It's not always the answer I'm expecting or that I want, but I do find that that talking with them seems to be sort of a two-way street. I don't feel like I'm not being heard. Thank you.
Norma or Marilyn, and I unmuted you.
Hi, this is Marilyn. I had, so my mom had a serious accident a number of years ago where she injured her neck and ended up having surgery. And it's really a difference of millimeters between walking or being a quadriplegic. And it took me a long time to make peace with that. And what I realized is that my father wasn't ready for her and that she needed to do some more living here on earth. And that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Pamela, did you change your mind? Your hand was up a second ago. Go ahead, Pamela. I unmuted you.
Thank you. I lost my mother, or my mother went to another place about 3 years ago. And she too suffered from Alzheimer's. And I did a lot of grieving while she was in the state of Alzheimer's, but still alive. Because many days she wasn't most days in the end, she was not my mom anymore. She was a shell. But just before she died, she remembered who I was. She recognized me. And I attended a concert with her at the memory care center, and she looked at me and beamed at me, and her eyes kept coming and meeting mine. And when I left, she reached out her arms to me and gave me a huge hug. I then left the country on a trip, and when I came back, I found she had already gone. I did grieve then because the physical sense of who she was to me was gone. But I also did feel relief for her. She was terrified of going further into Alzheimer's. Her mother had done so. And so I knew that she was relieved. She had quit eating, and I think she chose to do that. She wasn't that far along in her Alzheimer's. And I just thought, go mom. And I still do miss her. I've got tears right now, but I talk to her a lot. And I sometimes feel her presence in my life still. So overall, I feel good. But of course, there's my own personal feeling of, oh, I wish I could share that recipe with her. Or, oh, she would like to hear about this. But still, I know she's in a better place. That's it.
Anybody else? Janice, I saw your hand go up. And then Richard.
As everybody knows, or most everybody, my husband Jerry was diagnosed with brain tumors in 2003. We went together through a grieving process because of the situation. In 2006, he had a burst artery in his duodenum, and he actually died, and they brought him back. And I still vividly remember the doctors coming out and telling me that he had died. And I thought he was gone. And I was going into shock, I think. And then they came out and said that he was back. Jerry remembered the experience, and he remembers being given a choice to either go into the tunnel or to come back, and he chose to come back. And then I had him from 2006 until 2015. So it was a lot of up and down grieving. And I had a hard time with him passing. I had just finished radiation and chemo for breast cancer. And it was a really difficult time. And then I was getting past it. And then now I find that this year, as a result of the pandemic, I'm feeling his loss again. But I'm starting to come out of it, I think, and getting perspective back. So grief is an interesting process because for some time, for me at least, it comes back periodically. And then I get perspective and I can move on. And that's where I hope I am at this point, is moving on again.
Richard, I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to continue about how different my losses were. My oldest son died of a heart attack on a business trip, and he had left a beautiful family. He had a lot going for him. So I was kind of in shock and really, really in grief. My younger son, who had mental, physical, and alcohol issues, after he died, I felt at peace. So I just wanted to share this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'm not seeing anybody. Speak up, please, if I've missed you.
Thank you for facilitating, Chris. I have to say, there's many things I love about faith communities. I'm a little bit of an enthusiast, thank God. But one thing I really love is that, to me, there's no need to hide. There's no need to hide when grief cycles back, whether it's after a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, there's no need to hide. Being honest about how different deaths impact us in different ways. And the stories of many of you feeling loved ones in your presence, even after they've been gone for some time, is very real. I've heard it for so many years, it's hard to imagine it's not real. So here's to Cardinals and conversations and times when we feel our loved ones with us. So let's sing together. The hymn is 18 in the gray hymnal, What Wondrous Love.